It all started with one innocent purchase. My girlfriend Linda found an old dollhouse on the internet, auctioned for pennies. She has always been interested in antiques, especially small things like antique toys. The house had everything: miniature tables, chairs, beds, tiny dishes. However, it was not just a toy house. It was a real work of art. The house looked like someone wanted it to be an exact replica of the real one. Even the wallpaper, the patterns on the furniture, everything was terribly detailed. First glance, I was against this purchase. The thing looked gloomy in the old-fashioned way, even somehow ominous. But Linda persuaded me, assuring me that it was just a beautiful old house that she wanted to put in the living room. I didn't pay attention to her words at the time. Eventually, the house was delivered a few days later. As soon as Linda unpacked it and put it in a prominent place, the strangeness began. The first oddity was the smell. It was an unpleasant, slightly musty smell, as if the house had been standing in a damp basement or in a closed closet for a long time, but no odor remedy helped. I tried several times to figure out where it was coming from, but everything pointed to this dollhouse. Linda just waved it off. Maybe the house is just old. Over time, the smell will go away. But then the sound started. It happened at night when the house was quiet. Melodious creaks, as if the doors in the house were slowly opening and closing. Sometimes you could hear a faint rustling, as if someone inside the house was rearranging furniture. At first, I attributed it to my fatigue or the wind, but soon it became clear that something was wrong in the house. One night, I was woken up by a loud bang. At first, I thought someone had entered the house. The sound was so loud that it woke us both up. Linda and I quickly jumped out of bed, but we didn't find anything suspicious. I went through the house, checking the windows and doors, but everything was locked. When I returned to the living room, I found a dollhouse on the floor. It was upside down, and one of the doll doors was wide open. "Did you drop it?" I asked Linda. "No, I didn't even touch him." She looked scared. That's when I started seriously thinking about getting rid of this house. But Linda insisted that it was all just a coincidence. I tried to believe it, even though it was getting harder every day. As soon as it started to get dark outside, I felt that some kind of tension was building up in the house. The feeling of being watched grew stronger every night. One day, I was left alone at home. Linda went to her friend's house for the evening, and I decided to watch a movie to take my mind off my thoughts. I was sitting on the couch, and I heard that same creaking, slow and ominous. It was coming from the dollhouse. I turned off the TV and listened. This time the sound was crisp and clear. It was the creaking of the floor, as if someone was walking through the tiny rooms inside the toy. I approached the house, trying to find the source of the sound, but as soon as I got closer, everything went quiet. I felt a strange chill. The air in the living room suddenly turned icy. I knew the heating was on, but it didn't help. I was standing in front of the house and looking at the small doors when suddenly one of them slammed shut with a deafening bang. It jumped back, my heart pounding. I didn't sleep that night. All I could do was wait for Linda to return. In the morning, when she arrived, I told her everything. She was laughing, of course, but I could see that she was uncomfortable too. A couple of days later, Linda, as always, was checking the house, rearranging the small figures inside when she suddenly froze. "What happened?" I asked. She was silent and then slowly pulled out one of the dolls. It was a miniature replica of herself, down to the smallest details: hair color, clothes, even facial expression. I felt my blood freeze in my veins. "I didn't buy this," she said in a whisper. We tried to remember if this doll had been there before. Linda claimed that she had never seen her, and I was sure that she had not been there from the very beginning. We both started to panic. The next day, when I returned from work, I found another doll. This time she looked like me, a small, clumsy copy, but clearly imitating my image. It was too much. I took the dollhouse, went outside, and threw it in the trash can. Linda tried to stop me, but I was adamant. After I threw away the dollhouse, Linda and I felt some relief. The next day it was quiet, even unusually calm. We decided that maybe it was all a figment of our imagination, either stress or just a coincidence. But in the evening of the same day, I began to notice small, subtle details that made me doubt it. At first, it was a feeling of mild discomfort. It's like someone is watching you from the corner of the room, even when you're sure you're alone. Such a feeling happens in an empty house, when every shadow is distorted by the imagination. All evening, I felt that I was not alone in the apartment, although Linda was busy in another room. It seemed as if something invisible was moving around the house, leaving a trace of faint tension in the air. At night, we heard strange sounds again. Creaking and rustling sounded as if from under the floor. I immediately thought of the dollhouse, but reminded myself that it was gone. Linda, apparently, did not want to admit that something was bothering her too. She just closed her eyes and tried to sleep, but I couldn't. The problem started the next day when Linda suddenly disappeared from work. I couldn't reach her in the evening. Her phone was disconnected. Wasn't like her. She usually always texted or called if she was late. I started to worry. When I finally got to her office, my colleagues informed me that she had left around noon and had not returned. I returned home in a state of confusion. Not knowing what to think, I searched every corner of the house, as if looking for traces that could explain where she had gone. A few hours later, Linda finally called me. Her voice sounded nervous, and she was visibly confused. "I'm sorry, I don't remember how I ended up at the hotel," she said. It was like I wasn't in control of myself. Linda said that she suddenly felt an irresistible desire to leave her job, although she could not explain why. Her actions seemed automatic to her, as if someone or something was leading her along a pre-planned route. She just walked, not realizing where she was going, until she found herself in a hotel room a few blocks from our house. At that moment, I felt cold goosebumps running down my back. It all looked like a scene from some horror movie, but it happened to us in real life. We didn't talk about it, but we both realized it had something to do with the dollhouse. After that incident, life turned into a nightmare. Linda began to have recurring dreams of walking around an empty dollhouse, and each time she found a new doll inside that looked like one of us. Every time she woke up in a cold sweat, firmly convinced that something was watching us, even when we were asleep. But the scariest thing happened when we discovered that the dollhouse had returned. It was one morning when I was going to work. Passing by the living room, I froze. There was a dollhouse on the table, as if it had never been thrown away. Everything was in its place as before. Tiny figures, miniature pieces of furniture. All this caused me horror and misunderstanding. How could he come back? I asked Linda, who was equally shocked. We both knew it was impossible. I personally threw out the house and saw the garbage truck take it away. But here he is again. Linda went to the house and opened the door of one of the rooms with trembling hands. There were dolls inside, two figures that looked eerily like us. I wanted to destroy it immediately, but Linda insisted on exploring the house in more detail. We contacted a local antiques expert to find out at least some information. He was an elderly man with deep wrinkles on his face and sharp, searching eyes. When we showed him the photos of the house, he immediately turned pale. "This house is not just an old toy," he said, voice trembling. "This is a replica of a real house that was built more than a century ago. The house burned down a long time ago. The people who lived in it died in terrible circumstances. We found out that the family that owned the original house suddenly disappeared. There were various rumors. Some said that they had been killed, others that they had simply disappeared without a trace. But one thing was clear. This dollhouse was somehow connected to that house, and the figures inside were images of people whose souls or lives were connected to." Linda and I were shocked by the antiquarian's story, but anxiety was growing inside me. Even though I was trying to be rational, there were too many strange events going on around this house. We couldn't ignore the fact that the dolls that appeared inside were becoming more and more like us, and events were developing too strangely to be mere coincidences. When I got home, I looked at the dollhouse again. I was persistently haunted by the feeling that he was in control of something in our house, or perhaps even in our lives. But how could it be? It's just a wooden toy, artfully made, still a toy. We need to get rid of him. told Linda decisively, despite her mixed feelings about it. She still held on to her love of antiques, although her inner unease could be seen in her expression. We agreed, but instead of just throwing the house in the trash, I decided to burn it down. I didn't want this thing to come back again, like it happened last time. That night, I took him to a vacant lot outside the city, where I built a small fire. Linda stood aside, clearly not wanting to participate, also not daring to stop me. The dollhouse caught fire quickly, and the flames easily devoured the wooden walls. I watched him turn into charred wreckage, feeling relieved inside. But it was temporary. A week later, life began to return to normal. We almost forgot about the house. However, Linda soon noticed something that sowed fear again. One evening, she pointed to a small footprint on the living room floor. It was the footprint of a small foot, too small for an adult. He looked like someone was walking on the floor in doll shoes. We have thoroughly examined the entire apartment, but we have not found any explanation. It took another couple of days before more strange events began. Small items in the house began to disappear. Keys, chargers, even my headphone. But then we began to notice that they returned to their places, sometimes after a few hours, sometimes after a few days, but always in the same position, as if someone deliberately laid them out in such a way that we noticed. Linda tried to ignore it, but the fear was visible on her face. She slept restlessly at night, often woke up sweating, and her dreams became more and more disturbing. She told me about strange images, about how she saw a dollhouse in a dream, despite the fact that it was no longer there. Sometimes she would hear the dolls inside whispering to her. She would wake up and couldn't remember anything. The day came when I found one of the missing items in the most unexpected place. It was my wallet, and it was lying on the table in the living room, but its contents were laid out in neat piles. Money, cards, business card. It was all laid out in perfect order, as if someone wanted to demonstrate their ownership. It was really creepy, because no one but Linda and me could have done it. I began to suspect that someone was watching us. Perhaps one of the people we saw in the courtyard of our house. I spent several hours checking the security cameras, but there were no outsiders in the house. Then something even stranger happened. One morning, I found a new dollhouse on the living room table. It was an exact copy of the previous one, only smaller in size. There were two dolls inside. One looks like Linda, the other looks like me. This time I couldn't suppress a panic attack. I was rushing around the room trying to figure out how it happened. After all, we burned down the house. But this little version was here, and she was looking at me with the empty eyes of her doll figures. "We can't live like this," Linda whispered, looking at the new house. "He's back again." I didn't know what to say. Was it a coincidence? How did this house come back? Are we missing something? We decided to seek help, this time from a private investigator. I wanted someone to dispel our fears once and for all by checking the house for hidden cameras or signs of interference from strangers. The detective found nothing. All the locks, doors, windows, everything was in order. There are no signs of forced entry, no unauthorized entrances. We were at an impasse. He recommended that we consider changing our place of residence, but I felt that this would not solve the problem. After all, it wasn't about the house itself, but about what surrounds us. The feeling of fear became unbearable, became paranoid, avoided being alone in the room. Linda withdrew into herself, stopped communicating even with friends. She was looking out the window more and more often, as if she was looking for something. One evening, when I returned from work, I found that Linda was not at home. There was only a note on the table. "I'm sorry, but I can't take it anymore. This house is more than we can understand. I'm leaving." Couldn't believe my eyes. She just walked away, leaving me alone with this nightmare. The next day, I packed up and decided to leave too. I didn't know where I was going, but I was sure I couldn't stay here anymore. I took my things and left the house, feeling an inexplicable pressure behind my back, as if something was forcing me to stay. But I kept moving forward. When I finally looked back, I saw a dollhouse on the threshold, one with the dolls inside.